This podcast is brought to you by Reynolds & Reynolds. There are 3 waves of AI transforming our industry. Explore what they are, where AI technology is headed, and what these emerging innovations mean for automotive retailers at rayray.com/AI-waves for more info.
Welcome to Daily Drive for Tuesday, June 30th, 2026. I'm Jake Neer in Detroit, in for Kellen Walker. Today on the show, USMCA review talks are about to get officially underway. We'll talk about what's at stake. Jeep is plotting a comeback in Europe, and it's getting some help from China to pull it off. And Volkswagen's Works Council says it was left out of the loop on a plan to cut up to 100,000 jobs in Germany. Plus, J.D. Power's Tyson Jominy says the industry is making more money selling fewer cars and argues that chasing the old sales peak would be a costly mistake.
Even though we are very much in this Goldilocks era of the industry, where we have just enough inventory on the ground, incentives remain muted, transaction prices are high, dealer profitability remains high, that can always be challenged if we add more capacity than we need.
Let's run through all the news you need to know to keep up in the auto industry. The USMCA review talks officially kick off Wednesday with a virtual meeting among U.S., Canadian, and Mexican trade representatives. More detailed negotiations follow July 20th in Mexico City. Here's what's at stake. The Trump administration wants to push U.S.-specific vehicle content requirements up to 50%. Mark Wakefield at Alex Partners says that's the number that really matters because the supply base isn't there to support it. Higher costs, longer timelines, and automakers and the UAW can't even agree on what a good deal looks like. We will be covering this closely as the story progresses. Jeep is trying to make a comeback in Europe, and it's getting some help from China to do it. The Stellantis brand had to gut its European lineup after stricter EU emissions rules made its gas-powered SUVs too expensive to keep selling there. That left Jeep with just 2 models on the continent. Now it's plotting a path back to 6 by 2030. First up, the electric Recon arrives in 2027, then a plug-in hybrid midsize co-developed with Chinese partner Dongfeng. Jeep says 2 new small SUVs built in Europe will round out the recovery. And Volkswagen's Works Council is pushing back on a plan that could cut up to 100,000 jobs in Germany, and it says it hasn't even been consulted. Labor leaders said they had no part in shaping the plan, first reported by Manager Magazine. That's a problem for CEO Oliver Bloom. Labor holds a supervisory board majority, giving it real power to block deeper cuts. A critical board meeting is set for July 9th. And those are today's headlines. You can find more details on all those stories at autonews.com. Yesterday on the show, we talked about Texas quietly closing in on California as the country's top auto market. Tyson Jominy at J.D. Power put out a report on the shift. Today, we get a double dose of Jominy. In a bit, he makes the case for production discipline in the industry. But first, our own Clara Martinez caught up with him to talk about what it means that Texas could soon become the largest auto market in the U.S. by volume.
What takeaways did you want people to get from your recent J.D. Power report on shifting sales dynamics in those states, and what has the reaction been?
Well, we've heard so much about the shifting demographic changes going on in the United States, certainly post-COVID, as a lot of consumers have packed up and moved across the country for various reasons. But to actually see it in the data is really cool, in that we can see that Texas is very quickly closing in on California for sales leadership in the United States. We go back to California and its role in the auto industry. I mean, we're talking about a 70-year plus trend here, with California being sort of the epicenter of cars, of car culture, of technology and trying new things, whether it's hot rods and rat rods or hybrids and electric vehicles. California has been leading in that for so long. And now what we're seeing is that Texas is poised to surpass California. It may not happen this year, but it does look like, based on trends, that it will happen here probably in 2027. What's also cool, though, is that we found that from a dollar spent perspective, Texas has already surpassed California. The most dollars being spent by consumers in any state is in Texas, and they love their pickups, and that's what they're spending their money on, of course.
Yeah. Have you gotten any feedback from dealers, angry emails or anything like that?
I have not. I don't know why I would get angry emails from dealers, but certainly not the ones in Texas where a lot of consumers are going. But again, California remains pivotal to the auto industry. And I don't think that role will change in the short term, which is that California in many ways still sets the culture for the industry, and appealing to California consumers is critical. But we do recognize that, who is buying is different in Texas, and what they're buying is different. And Texas consumers are slightly richer consumers, and they are buying fancier trucks at the expense of the premium luxury side of the industry and at the expense of the sedan side of the industry. So California remains sort of the last bastion of sedan sales in this country. And as it shifts towards Texas, it's really mirroring what we see in the rest of the United States. So it's not necessarily any dealers that they should be upset. But it's just something to react to. And dealers are very good business people. And they have reacted. We have thrown a number of challenges in front of dealers here in the past 6 years since COVID, and we have seen them respond. They are very good, adaptive business people. And if the conditions change, they will be the first ones out there to change with them.
J.D. Power's Tyson Jominy spoke with our own Clara Martinez. Coming up, more from Jominy, this time about why the industry is making more money today selling 1 million fewer vehicles than it did at its peak, and what could blow it all up. That's next on Daily Drive.
Three waves of AI are transforming our industry as we know it today. Hear from AJ McGowan, Vice President of Research and Development at Reynolds & Reynolds, on all three waves of AI in automotive, where we're heading, and what the latest cutting-edge innovations mean for automotive retailers.
So I want you to picture what it would be like on that same Tuesday morning that we talked about earlier with a full agentic infrastructure in place. Your service manager wouldn't start the day by reading reports. Ray hands them 3 ROs that need attention and tells them why. Your sales manager wouldn't spot check calls. Ray already routed the ones that mattered. The GM doesn't reconstruct yesterday. Ray reconstructed it overnight and gave them a summary. And your controller doesn't have to pull the deal level analysis every Friday. Ray runs it on Thursday and flags anything that's worth a conversation. Decisions can get made earlier in the day with better information by fewer people. And that's what the agentic wave actually feels like in your store. It feels and sounds a little bit like science fiction, but at the end of the day, it's not. It's just a faster Tuesday.
If you're interested in exploring how AI can improve operations at your dealership, visit rayray.com/AI-waves. That's rayray.com/AI-waves.
Welcome back to Daily Drive. I'm Jake Neer. J.D. Power's Tyson Jominy has a new guest column in Automotive News this week, arguing that the auto industry has stumbled into something remarkable. It's now more profitable selling 1.2 million fewer vehicles a year than it was at its sales peak in 2016. Dealers are making more, incentives are lower, automaker margins are stronger, and Jominy's warning is simple. The biggest risk now is forgetting how we got here. He spoke with our own Francis Clem.
Tyson Jominy, welcome to Daily Drive. So you wrote a recent guest commentary piece that argues that automakers could generate more profits with smaller inventories. What threats do you see to this so-called industry equilibrium that you wrote about, where dealers are profitable, OEM margins are strong, and consumers are successfully finding the right vehicle? You wrote that the danger for the industry is assuming those conditions will last. What are the stakes of the moment the industry is in right now?
Well, the real challenge is that industry is so fragile to maintain this level of discipline, and that fragility really comes from, it's a fixed asset industry. So the temptation is always there to produce another unit, because once you cover your fixed cost, automakers would see a tremendous rise in their per unit profitability for each incremental sale. So the temptation is always there to produce one more unit in the hopes that you would sell that unit and that it doesn't go into inventory. And so that's the risk we run into. We have discipline. We have had discipline before at various points in time in the industry. And it's always proved in the end that we overbuild Overbuilding means inventories rise, and when inventories rise, dealer margins fall and incentives increase, and that leads to worse profitability.
And after COVID, there's this turning point where automakers learn that less can be more in terms of supply. What about the pandemic caused that change, and what lessons from the pandemic are still impacting the industry today?
Well, what we know is that it's a global industry that we're in with a global supply chain. And so when we first ran into something like a global pandemic, it impacted countries differently at different times with different duration and intensity. And that led to effects that spilled out across the industry. So automakers have different exposure levels to different countries through their supply chain. And as the industry rebounded from COVID, it quickly ran into the supply chain crisis. What we found there was demand remained very high for new vehicles in the months following COVID. And with the industry down, an old rule of thumb is you need every part on the vehicle to build the vehicle. We were finding that not every part was available, in particular, microchips that are needed all throughout the vehicle to maintain emissions and engine control, powertrain, et cetera. And so as we built fewer vehicles and yet demand remained very high, the industry ran into some very profitable months, and in fact, about 18 months of very high profitability levels, driven by the fact that we couldn't build enough vehicles to meet demand. So we saw both a shift in demand higher and supply lower, and that led to those prices. In many ways, we're still experiencing a number of those dynamics here in the industry, in that we have never recovered back to pre-COVID sales levels. Right before COVID, we finished off, well, we started 2016 at 17.5 million sales. That number trended down over time. But as we ran into COVID, we were right around 17 million sales. This year, we expect the industry to be back to 16.3 million, which would be equal to last year and two of the best years since COVID happened in terms of volume. So it's been a challenge for anyone to get back to those volume numbers. But what we found is that profitability has actually continued to remain very high from these dynamics.
And are there key areas where automakers can tighten their supply?
Well, yeah, it certainly works by automaker, by segment in a lot of cases. We tend to see a lot of supply for large pickups. Now, this is a segment where the number of buildable combinations can often reach into the billions, as pickup buyers are looking for very specific combinations of options and features in their trucks. So we tend to build a lot of pickup trucks, and there's always a balancing act of having too much supply, which means we have a lot of choice, but that oversupply also tends to lead to a lot of incentives. So it's not uncommon for a full-size pickup to have $6,000 or more dollars on the hood to move the vehicle. But of course, it's not just pickup trucks. There are other segments as well. Some of the highest selling segments are where we tend to send most of the inventory, and that tends to be a lot of the SUV segments. But again, it is to be mentioned by automaker. You take like Toyota right now, which is still launching the all-new RAV4. And there's very few of those throughout the country. So even in a segment like compact SUV, where most automakers tend to have sufficient supply, there are automakers that have a lot, maybe too many vehicles on the ground. And then there are others that, quite frankly, are still operating under dynamics that we would have seen, 4 years ago in 2022.
And what do automakers need to do right now to avoid the mistakes of past generations?
We'll certainly not build any more facilities, assembly plants, until we can, really see what demand levels will be in the future.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways, what we had done recently is, in particular with the EVs, and there's this sort of hidden dynamic that not a lot of people focus on with EVs. We spent so much on the R&D for EVs and getting the industry ready to transition to this technology. Well, when that didn't materialize, it served as a lid as to what we could build, because we had dedicated so much of our plant capacity toward building EVs for the future that we didn't need. That means that we've been going through a period here for about a year where inventory levels have been flat, because the industry is now switching back to ICE, and we don't have that excess capacity on ICE today because we devoted so much of it to EVs. Now, as the industry starts to switch back, we'll start to see the true capacity levels for internal combustion engines start to increase again. And that's where we may see some challenges. But everyone needs to recognize that we are bringing a lot of capacity back over to produce ICE vehicles that we didn't have. So even though we are very much in this Goldilocks era of the industry, where we have just enough inventory on the ground, incentives remain muted, transaction prices are high, dealer profitability remains high, that can always be challenged if we add more capacity than we need.
And are other factors contributing to automaker profitability, such as rising new vehicle prices and affordability concerns? And how have the addition of tariffs played a role in affected incentive spending?
Yeah, so profitability is being threatened by a number of factors, and tariffs are really the big one. Automakers are experiencing worse profitability from tariffs because they find that they are unable to pass through those tariff costs to consumers. The reason that is the same reason we talked about earlier about the global supply chain. Automakers have a very asymmetric exposure to the effects of tariffs. Some automakers produce almost all their vehicles in the U.S., others bring in essentially zero. And so if you're one of those automakers that have all your facilities overseas, like a lot of the premium automakers do, they would really want to pass those costs through, but they find that since others don't have that same requirement, it's quite difficult to pass that through. So the profitability we've been talking about is related strictly to essentially the front end environment of selling cars. As automakers fully account for the increase in their cost, they may actually be in a much worse profitability position today, even as on the front end environment in the auto industry, we are experiencing much better profitability.
J.D. Power Senior Vice President Tyson Jominy spoke with our own Francis Clem. You can read Jominy's full guest commentary at autonews.com. That's Daily Drive for today. I'm Jake Neer. Thanks to our own Clara Martinez and John Irwin for their reporting for today's podcast. We also had reporting from Luca Ciafferi of our sibling publication, Automotive News Europe. You can get the latest news on the USMCA review talks, the state of the auto market, and everything happening in the auto industry at autonews.com. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of the show and the topics we covered today. Send us an email at dailydrive@autonews.com or leave us a voicemail at 313-444-2774. And if you enjoy the podcast, remember to like, leave a review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode.